Welcome to today's video. This is Randy Orwin, Assistant Director for Learning Technologies at the University of Washington Information School. In today's video, Grading, Policies, Procedures, and Practices, I will be giving a 30,000-foot overview of the policies and procedures surrounding grading at the iSchool, and then cover a few best practices at the end. I have put together a Google document that includes an overview of all the content and links to all of the pages referenced in this video. You can find the document at https://tinyurl.com/y9haex87. Feel free to pause the video and type it into your browser and follow along during the presentation. Let's start by taking a look at the central UW undergraduate grading system. The undergrad grading system page includes a bunch of information, but for this presentation I am only going to focus on those items that have a direct impact on iSchool instructors. The undergrad standard grading system is, oddly enough, referenced to the letter grade scale, which in my 7 years at the iSchool has never been referenced, especially since Canvas and its percentage-based system came onto the scene in 2011. The key thing on this scale is at the bottom end, where we learn that the lowest passing grade that will show up on an undergraduate transcript is a 0.7. This page includes a number of other letter grades that can be given in a course, but I will only touch on 2 of them, and you can read about the rest on your own. On occasion, you may be asked to give a student an incomplete. Note that an incomplete is only given when a student has been doing satisfactory work up until the last 2 weeks of the quarter. If something happens beyond the student's control during the last 2 weeks of instruction, causing them to drop below the passing level, you can give them an incomplete. Students have 1 quarter to complete required makeup work at a passing level to convert the grade to a passing level. If the makeup work is not completed by the end of the next quarter, the grade will automatically convert from an I to a 0.0. In special circumstances, a student may be given up to a year to complete the makeup work. The last thing to consider on the undergrad grading system is the section about changing grades after a quarter has finished. It is important to note that grade changes are only accepted in case of an error in calculation or input into GradePage. More details on GradePage are included later in this presentation. Now, let's take a look at the iSchool's undergraduate grading policies. The iSchool has a policy that for a class to count towards a student's degree program, they must attain a grade of a 2.0 or higher. If a student from another department is enrolled in an informatics course, trying to fulfill an elective for a different degree program, they must attain a grade of 1.7 or greater. As mentioned earlier, the minimum passing grade that will show on an undergraduate transcript is a 0.7. Now let's move on to the central UW graduate level grading system. Very similar approach on this page, comparing the GPA scale to the letter grade scale. I am still not sure why they do this in light of the Canvas percentage calculations. The first piece of info on this page is that a 2.7 is required for any course to count towards a graduate degree, and the lowest passing grade in any graduate level course is a 1.7. Anything below a 1.7 will automatically be changed to a 0.0. It should be said again that although a graduate student may not get credit towards the degree below a 2.7, they still get credit that counts on a transcript down to a 1.7. As a graduate level instructor, please be sure that you still grant credit between a 1.7 and a 2.7. A few faculty in the past haven't shown in their syllabus that students still get some kind of credit below the 2.7 cutoff for credit in the graduate level courses. As far as incompletes are concerned, the rule is the same in regards to when you are allowed to give an incomplete. Incompletes are only allowed if the student showed satisfactory work until the last 2 weeks of the quarter. If something happens beyond the student's control, you may give an incomplete. The difference between grad and undergrads on incompletes is that grad students have up to 2 years to complete the makeup work. If at the end of 2 years the work hasn't been completed, the incomplete becomes permanent on the student's transcript. The iSchool graduate grading policies are identical to the graduate school policies. A 2.7 is required to get credit in the major. 1.7 through to 2.7 still shows up on the transcript, and anything below 1.7 is automatically converted to a 0.0. The piece that many instructors reference in their course syllabus is the iSchool's Graduate Grading Guidelines. The guidelines have no relationship to how a grade is converted from a Canvas percentage to the GPA scale, and everything to do with the quality of the work required to receive a certain grade on the GPA scale. These guidelines do provide excellent information to students regarding the quality of the work needed to attain higher grades. Okay, the next link in the Google Doc is to something called FROG, or the Faculty Resource on Grading. This site was put together back in 2010 by the Office of Educational Assessment. This isn't a policy site, but is considered a reference site for faculty about grading. In doing the 4 grading workshops on January 3rd, none of the attendees even knew this site existed. The majority of the information on this site is from a 1992 article titled "Developing a Personal Grading Plan." I'm not sure when the site was last updated, as there is no reference to Canvas and the percentage grade system. That about covers it from a policy perspective, so let's move on to a few procedures related to setting up your gradebook in Canvas, submitting your grades via GradePage, and submitting grade changes using the Change of Grades request form. The first link under the Procedures section of the Google Doc is just a link to the Canvas grading page on the Learning Technologies support site. This page will give you lots of information about most of the topics covered in the Procedures section and should be considered your go-to spot for grading assistance. Before talking about setting up your Canvas gradebook, let me take some time to describe how Canvas calculates grades. The first thing to know about the Canvas gradebook is that the database doesn't store final grades anywhere. Grades in the total column are recalculated every time the page reloads. Canvas looks at all of the rules you have set in your gradebook, including checking to see if the assignment is muted or not, calculates the grade, and sends it to the total column. The same is true on the student side, but on occasion, like when assignments are muted, the total grade for the student could be different than what the instructor sees in their gradebook. The other thing to understand is that Canvas only calculates grades based on assignments that have been graded, meaning that if there is a dash in the gradebook, that score won't be calculated in the total. So, basically, the Canvas total column is a snapshot of how a student is doing at a given point in time. This can be deceptive, especially if you have a final activity that is worth a large percentage of the total grade. A student could be doing fine in the course up to the final project, do poorly, and receive a grade much lower than they have seen all quarter. There are ways to set things up differently so that students start with 0 and work up to the final grade at the end of the quarter, but this configuration is beyond the scope of this video. The final thing to understand about the Canvas gradebook is that all grades are calculated using percentages, even if you show an assignment as points or even as a GPA scale. This is very important information, especially if you're trying to grade individual assignments using some kind of GPA scale. If your gradebook isn't set up correctly to use a GPA scale, students will consistently receive lower grades than they should. To see the impact of grading using a GPA scale that is incorrectly configured, check out this Google Sheet, https://tinyurl.com/ydfbncz5. You should be able to change the number of points to see the numbers change. Notice that the percentages do not change when you change the number of points. Now, let's talk about the two most popular ways to set up your gradebook, weighted and unweighted. When using an unweighted gradebook, often the instructor decides to use 100 points as the maximum amount for a course. They assign points to the course activities so that all of the points add up to 100. This is a way of assigning different importance to the various activities, with more important assignments getting more points. I have seen some faculty go to extremes to match the points to their activities, assigning fractions of a point to quiz questions to keep a 20-question quiz at 5 points. A much easier approach is to use the weighted grading system built into Canvas. In this situation, you just let Canvas do the math. The short version of this is to create assignment groups telling Canvas what percentage of the total grade is assigned to each group. The nice thing here is that you can just give all assignments the same number of points, and Canvas makes sure that each group only gets a slice of the total that you assign. If you want to give an assignment more weight within a given group, just give it more points. For all the details, read the 2 pages listed in the Google Doc I shared earlier. I personally would always use the weighted grading system in Canvas. Next on the agenda is extra credit. The Learning Technologies team has received quite a few requests about how to assign extra credit in the Canvas environment. Once again, refer to the Google Doc for a great tutorial on the numerous ways of providing extra credit in a Canvas course. Please note that there are some gotchas when you add extra credit to gradebooks using the weighted grading option. Now for a couple of quick tips in managing and setting up your gradebook. If you are one that wants to show your total column in points, open up your gradebook and mouse over the small down arrow in the total column header and select the Switch to Points option. Your gradebook will now show the total column in points. Remember though that even if you tell Canvas to show your totals in points, on the back end, Canvas will always make the calculations in percentages. The second tip is for those that have lots of assignments, causing the horizontal scroll of death in order to see the total column. To alleviate the scroll of death, you can move your total column to the front of your gradebook so it's always visible. To turn this option on, go to your gradebook, scroll to the total column and click the small drop-down arrow in the column header. From the drop-down menu, select the Move to Front option. Your total column is now the third column in your gradebook. As we know, Canvas calculates all grades as a percentage, and UW requires you to submit your grades using the GPA scale. The first thing that you have to consider is how you will map the Canvas percentages to equivalent GPA grades. With this in mind, you need to create a table that shows the Canvas percentage in one column and the equivalent GPA grade in the next column. It is highly recommended that you post this conversion chart somewhere in your course so students know how you will make the conversion from the Canvas percentages to the GPA equivalent. Now, it just so happens that the iSchool has created a standard conversion scale that anybody can use in their Canvas courses. This scale can be found on the Learning Technologies support site and is linked to from the Google Doc. This scale was created to provide more consistency and transparency in regards to the conversion between percentages and GPA scores. The impetus for a standard conversion scale came about in 2013 when two students were enrolled in different sections of the same course taught by different instructors. At the end of the quarter, both students received the same percentage in Canvas, but received dramatically different GPA grades when viewed on their transcripts. One student received a 3.8, while the other received a 3.2. Needless to say, the student with the 3.2 was not a happy camper. Over the next 3 years, I collected about 20 different conversion scales from both the iSchool and other units on campus. I did some frequency distribution analysis on the sample scales, conversed with some of our faculty, and created the first standard conversion scale in 2016. A few instructors decided to use the standard scale, and by autumn 2017, approximately 23% of iSchool courses were using the standard scale. A review of the standard scale occurred in February and March of 2018, resulting in a few changes, mostly in the cutoffs for a course to count towards the degree requirements. The cutoff for the informatics program was increased to 75%, and the cutoff for the graduate degree programs was moved up to 82%. The other change was to round each point off to the nearest 0.5. The new scale was adopted as the recommended scale for the informatics program in March of 2018. Autumn of 2018 saw use of the standard scale nearly triple from the previous year, with approximately 73% of all iSchool courses adopting the standard scale. Once you have selected or created a conversion scale, the next logical choice, and also highly recommended, is to add your scale as a grading scheme in your Canvas course. In essence, grading scheme is Canvas's term for a conversion scale. Once you enable a grading scheme in your course, the GPA equivalent grade will show up next to the percentage grade in the total column, consistently providing students their final grade in GPA form. So why would you want to configure a grading scheme in your Canvas course? There are two big reasons to configure a grading scheme, one for you and one for your students. On the student side, as mentioned earlier, it provides a continuous conversion from percentage scale to GPA scale in the Canvas total column. This just makes it easy for students to know where they stand on the GPA scale at all times. For you as an instructor, the biggest reason to use a grading scheme is to make your life simpler when submitting grades via grade page at the end of each quarter. If your gradebook is prepared correctly for submission, the total column in your Canvas gradebook should be identical to the grade that appears in grade page when you do a Canvas export. This makes it really easy to verify that what is in Canvas is the same thing that appears in grade page before doing the final submission. More about grade page to come in the next section. When you add a grading scheme to your Canvas site, you can use a custom scheme matching the conversion scale you have created, or you can use the iSchool standard scheme. If you decide to use the iSchool standard scheme, you will always find it as an option on the settings page in your Canvas course. Instructions on how to set up the iSchool scheme or your own scheme can be found on the Learning Technology support site on the grading page. Links to this page are also found in the Google document. At the end of each quarter, all grades must be submitted using the UW grade page system. This system will import grades from both Canvas and the Catalyst gradebook, and also allows you to manually input grades if you so desire. You can always get access to GradePage through your MyUW portal. When exporting grades from Canvas, you must complete 3 tasks prior to clicking the Submit button. You have to prepare your Canvas gradebook for export, create a matching grade scale in GradePage, and verify that the grades in Canvas match the grades that appear in GradePage. Before exporting your Canvas grades, you must prepare your gradebook. This makes sure that the grades are calculated correctly. There are 2 important things to do in preparing your gradebook for export. Change all dashes to zeros and unmute any muted assignments. As mentioned earlier, dashes in the Canvas gradebook are not used in the total grade calculation. This is very problematic when exporting final grades, as generally, leaving dashes in the gradebook results in grade inflation. Let's say, for example, a student has not turned in multiple assignments and you haven't changed their grade to a 0. Those missing assignments will not count towards their final grade, and the student will appear to be doing quite well in the class, when in reality, they could potentially be failing. Hence the reason to go back through your gradebook and change all dashes to zeros, unless you don't want a particular assignment to count towards the final grade. Changing dashes to zeros can be a bit of an arduous process if you have a large number of assignments. I recommend that during the grading process, all missing assignments receive a 0 when you grade the assignment. You can always go back and change the grade if they submit the work late. The advantage with marking all missing work as a 0 is that you don't have to go back into the gradebook later and change all of those dashes to zeros. After changing all dashes to zeros, go back and make sure that you have unmuted all assignments. Muted assignments are not calculated in the final grade in the student view, causing the grade to be different when it is exported to GradePage. Now that you have prepared your gradebook for export, you must log into GradePage and create a matching grade scheme. At this point, UWIT can't pull your grade scheme directly from Canvas, so the first time you use a grade scheme in Canvas, you need to create an identical scheme in GradePage. This guarantees that the conversion scale you are using is applied the same way in GradePage as it is in Canvas. See the Preparing Your Gradebook video mentioned above for information on setting up the grade scheme in GradePage. The good thing is that you only have to create each new scheme once in GradePage. All schemes you create will be available from a drop-down list the next time you need to submit grades for a course. After creating your matching grade scheme in GradePage, it is time to click the Import Grades button. GradePage will grab the grades from Canvas and return a verification page that allows you to compare what is in Canvas with what is in GradePage. The easiest way to do this is to open 2 browser windows side by side so you can see the total column in Canvas and the exported grades column in GradePage. If all is right with the world, these 2 columns should be identical. Verify that all of the grades are the same. If you see discrepancies on multiple grades, odds are that you have errors in your gradebook preparation, or the grade scheme in GradePage doesn't match the grade scheme in Canvas. Do not click Submit until you get all of the grades to match up. The last part of the Procedures section is related to submitting grade changes. Once you have submitted grades through GradePage, miss the GradePage submission deadline, or need to change an error in your submission, you must fill out a change of grade request form. My recommendation is to always use the online form. It is quicker and much easier to use. Using the online change of grade request form allows you to submit single changes or change grades for an entire class, either manually or by uploading a spreadsheet file into the system. Herein lies another reason to verify that Canvas grades match GradePage grades before you click the Submit button. If they don't match and you click Submit, you will need to manually change the grades using the grade change form, because submitted grades are not editable in GradePage. I can't stress enough, make sure that both Canvas and GradePage grades match before clicking Submit. Okay, now on to the best practices section of the video. In this section, I will talk about a few of my recommended best practices, some of which you have already heard about. To start, I recommend that every course include a list of course outcomes, or what students will know and be able to do at the end of the class. This should be published somewhere in the course syllabus for students to review. Having a clear set of outcomes makes it much easier to plan for assessment and design assignments that will impart the knowledge and experience needed for assessment of the outcomes. Getting a bit more granular, I highly recommend that you use rubrics with every assignment. The rubric identifies the criteria that a student will be measured upon, usually in some kind of a mastery scale. Rubrics should be specific and not generalized. There are 3 reasons to use a rubric. 1. Using a rubric helps you as the instructor to identify the specific things that you want students to know and be able to do at the end of the assignment, which ties in directly with what you want them to know and be able to do for the entire course. 2. Using a rubric will also provide much more consistency when grading an entire class, especially if you have TAs or reader graders. A good, specific rubric will really make a difference with TAs to get similar scores across the spectrum of graders. The last reason to use a rubric, and possibly the best reason, is to allow students to self-assess their own work before submission. A good rubric allows students to reflect on the quality of their work, comparing their responses to the rubric and making adjustments before submitting the final copy. My next recommendation is to provide feedback as soon as possible after students submit an assignment. When I teach, I tell students that I will try and get all of their work back to them within 48 hours for shorter assignments and within a week for all others. Good feedback is critical to the success of your students in your courses. The last few best practices are items I have already mentioned earlier in the presentation, but warrant a repeat here. When grading assignments, I would recommend that you remember to mute the assignment before you begin the grading process. Muting the assignment makes sure that no student sees their assignment score before the other students have been graded. Once an assignment is muted, the students will see the muted icon, a bell with a slash through it, in the score column for the muted assignment. When they mouse over it, they will see a pop-up notification that says, "Instructor is working on grades." For the reasons mentioned earlier, it is highly recommended that you set up a grading scheme in your courses so students will always see the equivalent GPA grade in the total section of their grade page. While we would love everybody to use the iSchool standard grading scheme, this recommendation applies even if you're using your own grading scheme. The last recommendation was mentioned earlier as well, but warrants a second mention. Whether you use a grade scheme or not, it is highly recommended that you provide the scale on how you are going to convert Canvas percentages to the UW GPA scale. This should be included somewhere on your syllabus page. If using a custom conversion scale, please list it here. And if you're using the iSchool standard scale, you can just provide the link to the appropriate page on the Learning Technologies support site. Thanks for taking the time to watch this presentation on grading policy, procedures, and practice. I hope you found it helpful. As always, if you have questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to send an email to our help desk email address at olt@uw.edu, and don't hesitate if you want to ping me directly at orwinr@uw.edu.